right, let's end with this idea, or the exploit, or the hack of SQL injection. And I love this one because you can so understand it from what we've already learned about SQL. So there is one extra thing I have to tell you, however, about SQL before you can understand that, and that's that we've only studied one part of SQL, and that's the part of SQL that does queries. Oh, there's a cool flock of seagulls flying overhead. Very nice. Very nice morning, by the way, although it could rain any second. So what we know about SQL is that it can do queries, right? We can do select from where, and that will retrieve information from our database. Well, queries, it turns out, are not only questions about can you retrieve information from me, but in SQL at least, there are also queries about, for example, can you delete information, or can you update information, or even stuff like can you create tables. So a SQL query can do a lot more than simply just retrieving information, and that's what this SQL exploit, this SQL injection, is all about. So the term SQL injection, what does that mean? It means I'm putting SQL commands, I'm putting SQL queries into the system that weren't there before. As I said before, remember what I said before about SQL queries, that they're usually running on the server, right? They're not running on the client. You don't type a query into the client and then that accesses the database, that accesses the data tier. No. You type just input. You type your name, your address, your telephone number, whatever. Then that's translated into a query on the server, and then that query on the server queries the database. Well, this is a slick little method for giving the server a query that it didn't know it had. Okay, so in a usual input control, you just type your name, for example, or you type your email address or something like that. And in the SQL injection, instead of typing your name or your email address into this control, you actually type in a query that you want the server to run. And by doing slick things, breaking the query the query in certain ways, you actually fool the server computer into running your query. And then the results are whatever you wanted to have happen. So let's look at a specific example. And I've taken this example from the work that we did previous on the Pandora cycle. Remember, I gave you this idea of data going all the way from the server, from the data tier all the way to the presentation tier, and then we talked about data going from the presentation tier all the way back to the server tier, all the way back to the data tier. And this was the example that I used for the data going from the presentation layer to the data tier. And just briefly to review that idea, we have a piece of user interface here, right? This user interface is written in HTML. It shows up in a web page. This is a thin client application. This is what we've been talking about. And notice that I can really start to talk at a really sophisticated technical level now, because you have the vocabulary and you have the background. So that's exactly what I'm hoping you get from this class, is the ability to understand that sort of vocabulary and talk at a level that allows you to talk about very interesting things with very interesting people. Okay, so we have a user interface here. That user interface has some decoration like the word Pandora. It has some content like this word's registered for free, and then it has controls. These are all input controls because you input information, right? You input your email, your password, your birth year, blah, 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 blah. And you are expecting when you do that you will register for Pandora. And in the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, you are registering for Pandora. But along comes someone with malicious intent. And by the way, I'm not saying that you could do this in this user interface. This is completely a made-up example. And in fact, I've really simplified it. The actual SQL injection is a little bit more sophisticated than what I'm showing you here, but not all that much more sophisticated. I've just trimmed it down a little bit so that you can understand it without really knowing SQL, without really knowing the SQL language. Okay, so we have a UI here. It's the people UI. It's meant to update the user table, or the people table, right? It's inside of Pandora. That's what we talked about before. We have input controls, and then we have those action controls down there. That's how this user interface works. Okay, so usually you type your email in there, but I'm the malicious guy, and I'm going to type a query in there, and the query in there is select password from people where email equals bob@uw.edu. So what's the hack here? I happen to know the email address, and what do I want? I want the guy's password, right? I want the guy's account information. And so I want to select the password from the people table where the email equals bob@uw.edu. Now notice bob@uw.edu is actually what's supposed to go in there. And so I'm kind of exploiting a loophole here to make it think that I'm typing in what it wants me to type in, but in fact, I'm typing in a query, and I'm going to get the server to run that query. And when it runs that query, what's going to come back? Bob's password, right? That's what I want to have. And so screen number 2, now I'm doing the reverse. I'm going from the data layer back to the user interface, right? I've tricked the server into running this query that returns the password. And what it thinks it's saying to me is, welcome at bob@meditorial.com or bob@uw.edu, right? You are now a member so it ran the query, it got back the password, and into the screen where it was like the welcome, you're now a member of our site, it actually injected the password. So the password comes back to the person. Now again, this is a simplified example, but this is not dissimilar to what real SQL injection does. Other things that SQL injection does, it can delete information, it can list all the records, so I could say, give me back what happens if I don't use a where clause. Right, so select password from the people table, and don't say which user. What's that going to do? We've talked about this a few times. What's that going to do? It's going to return all the passwords, and I can say select username password from this table if I can kind of guess the name of the table. Right, I do have to guess the name of the table, but what else are you going to call it? User, people, persons. There's only a limited number of names, and I try them all because I'm a hacker and I'm out there, for hours and hours just playing around. So I create the query, I inject the query into the server runs the query for me. The query either returns information that I want to compromise information, or maybe it to compromise the confidentiality of the information, or maybe I do malicious things like I kill the entire user table and all of a sudden the site goes down. So now I'm just marauding inside of their site.